everybody. This is Jordan Bradford here with Jeff Beck, and you're listening to Just Ballin' with JB, brought to you by D. Oliver Design. For all your commercial graphic design needs, visit doliverdesign.com. Join us each week as we break down the best stories in sports and have a little fun along the way. So, without further ado, let's get into episode number 7 here, Jeff.
Crazy.
And right out of the gate, we've got NBA starting tonight, right now. Actually, as we're recording this, the Celtics just finished up a nice victory over the New York Knicks. So, yeah, good title defense game. But along the lines of the NBA, let's talk a little Lakers, because that game's about to be tipping off. And you and I are big, LeBron James fans. And so I think the question that, listeners want to know is, what do LeBron and the Lakers need to do to start this season off on the right track?
Yeah, I was thinking through this, trying to figure out, is there certain data points that they got to be accomplishing to really see a certain level of success? Is it going to be more about, a feel as fans, as, coaches that they can kind of feel and say, hey, we're heading in the right direction? And I kind of came up with a little combination of both, I would say. So the Lakers are 0-6 in opening games of the season since LeBron's been with the Lakers. So obviously you can't get any worse than that. So, right, I mean, the idea there is they're just instantly getting off to a slow start, whether it's the first quarter of the
Sounds
season.
like we might have a new lock.
Yeah, there we go. We should have locked that one in early.
Timberwolves money line.
There we go. I mean, but that's kind of the first key that I'm thinking of is if they can win this game, would be a change that they have not seen since he's been in the Laker uniform. That's got to give him a little energy, a little boost. Not to mention, like you said, against the Wolves, that's obviously a very formidable opponent, up-and-coming team. They had a nice little playoff run last year. So I think that would just be kind of get that monkey off the back of not winning a single opening game. Start season 1-0, is always great. I think that would be a great way to really get it started. Then if you look in just a little bit further, a couple weeks out, if you will, through the end of October, after the Wolves, they have the Suns, the Kings, the Suns again, and then the Cavs. So again, kind of in that short stretch, I think if you can be 3-2 during that little stretch through October, kind of, again, get the season off on the right foot, and then kind of taking that a step further. I just think throughout the beginning of the season, staying in that playoff spot throughout the season. When you're in 13th place and you're up to 10th place and then you're just always back and forth in those bottom positions, I just feel like some of that energy might not be there every game. But if they're staying in the top 8, even if it's, in the play-in, but you're staying in that top 8 consistently, I think that'll just feel like the team is doing something. They're achieving something throughout the regular season. And then lastly, really, one of the things I think they've done recently has been saying, well, LeBron's getting older. AD is kind of taking over, but AD is a little more on the defensive end, kind of the specialty there. I think really, especially after these Olympic Games this summer, AD and LeBron need to come out incredibly strong. Of course, you want to see the other guys around there, D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, all those guys want to be doing something. But I think those two need to come out and set the tone early, get them off to all those right starts that I mentioned, maybe winning the first game of the year, a 3-2 start, staying in the top 8. Let those two guys get you into that spot first. Once that's been done, now maybe middle of the season where things get a little slow and things are kind of dragged, now let those younger guys step up and kind of carry you through some of that stuff. But I think the last few years they've been trying to let these younger guys come in right away and say, LeBron's got to take his foot off the gas. He's got to relax a little bit. And then they're just ending up in these really tough positions in their uphill battle the rest of the way. So I think if those two come out, no specific numbers or anything that they have to hit, but just setting the tone, be out there, be aggressive, let these guys know we're playing for something all year long right off the bat. I think that'd be huge for them, just getting off on the right foot.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with you on, LeBron and AD needing to, come out of the gate being the best players on the team and kind of making that known within the team, within those first few games. The thing is I trust LeBron to do that. That's all he's done his entire career is be the best basketball player on the planet. And he's doing it all the way up through the Olympics. And I expect him to do the same. I think it's on AD. He's got to come out with a little bit more fire. And I get his personality is not to just take over and be like, I'm the alpha dog now, but he's got to give us a little bit more, just a little. It doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to change his whole personality. He doesn't have to become a new guy, but he's got to be a little bit more assertive on the offensive end in these first couple weeks. Then midway through the season, you get into it, get back to your old self, be more of that defensive threat constantly. But I'd rather see him sacrifice a little on defense in these first couple weeks to get his offensive game going to help the team. But to your point, your first point, especially about just getting off to a good start. So I jotted some things down. So since they've won the championship in 2020, right, the bubble championship that people, some people out there don't appreciate, although I think it was as hard as any championship, if not harder potentially. Another conversation for another day, though. But since they won that championship, they finished in 7th place. They missed the playoffs, and that was a year where LeBron and AD were mostly injured. Finished 7th place again in the 22-23 season. And then last season, they finished in 8th place. And they had the best record last year of the last 4 at 47-35. But still, they finished in 8th. And the way the NBA playoffs work now, that puts you in the play-in tournament. So you got to get out of that 7 and 8 and below spot. You got to get off to a better start. Last season, at game 50, they won game 50 of the season to put them at 25-25. That's just not going to be acceptable if you are going to try to get to the Western Conference Finals or the NBA Finals and win a championship. You have to be better up until that point. And the year before that, when they were finished 43-39 and finished in 7th place, so they finished a place higher that year, they were not a 500 team at any point in the season until game 74. Which is insane. That means that they lost their first 5 or 6 games that season. And at no point until game 74 were they even a 500 team. They just cannot put themselves in a hole. And I know, 0-6 in these opening day games. And this is a tough matchup here tonight that they've got. And by the time people are listening to this, you're going to know the outcome. But I think the Lakers need to treat this like a playoff game tonight. Like a near must win. And come out with some intensity, show the league. They're like, yeah, our best player might be, 40 years old, but he's also maybe the best player in the NBA still. So it doesn't really matter. We're going to showcase that tonight. So that's what I think. They've got to get off to a good start. It's just
no, I agree. I think that's a huge part. You can't be just battling back and forth all the time. I think just a couple, additions to what you mentioned, but I think, treating not every game like it's a championship, but understanding how important every game still ends up being, right? You look at baseball and you're playing 160 game and you got basketball, 82 game. The NFL, you typically have more of that urgency because if you start 2-4, people are ruling you out, right? You're the Bengals and you're just done for. And, that's not insane. If you go on a run and make some things, obviously you can make that stuff happen. I think in the NBA, these veteran-led teams, guys who have been there, done that, especially LeBron, he's playing more games than anybody. You end up with these games like, it's just one game. But when you lose a lot of these games, too, in last-second shots, one-possession games, and you lose 10 of those, all you got to do is win half of those, and that's an extra 5 wins at the end of the season. And when you're sitting there 41-41, 5 wins all of a sudden puts you in maybe a couple spots higher in the playoffs. So I think not only is it getting off to good starts, treating like the first game of the year as kind of a championship game, but as those close games happen, understand pulling those out is a big difference. And that can change, just kind of sway where you end up in the positions for the playoffs and how you end up doing overall. So that's a big thing. And the last thing I was going to mention, we didn't even touch on JJ Redick, which I'm super excited to see, how that'll unfold and what he'll do. I'm a fan of his. I think he'll be a really good coach. But one of the first things he said when he got on board was talking about AD and how excited he was about some of the different actions that he could put him in. AD, we can all sit there and say that, we want him to be the aggressive guy and be the one to be the number one. But partly because of the way his game is played, where he is so effective is somewhat posting up. Even if it's kind of the high post and facing up, near the elbow, it's still posting up and someone getting him the ball. So I'd want to see not only, LeBron making sure that he's giving AD those chances when he's on the court, but also I think JJ is going to draw up some stuff to essentially force him to be aggressive. That's one of the things I think we've just seen in years past is he's doing his stuff on the defensive end. But then all these young guys, again, they're trying to get him in there. They're trying to, kind of get their confidence up. AD ends up just kind of standing there because someone has to get him the ball. LeBron has the ball in his hand, bring up the court. He gets to control what happens. He's in the pick and roll. He can dish it. He can drive it. He can shoot it. AD's not getting those same opportunities unless someone is putting the ball in his hands and giving him that chance. So I'm excited to see how JJ kind of brings him into the fold and keeps him being one of the main aggressors on the team. But yeah, I think we're on the same page. They got to get off to some quicker starts kind of throughout the whole first half of the season, quick starts in games right away to really put themselves in a good spot for the playoffs.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and we got to talk about JJ Redick at some point. Well, we don't have time to get into him tonight, but yeah, I mean, I think we're both really big fans of his, even back to his, Duke days. I mean, that's obviously where, most people were introduced to him. That's certainly where I was introduced to him, but I've always been a big fan of just kind of his personality, his style of play. I think he's going to be really, really successful in this league. And I hope that starts with a really, really good year this year for him. But yeah, awesome that NBA is finally back and we've got live action regular season games going on again. But let's switch gears a little bit. Let's move on to a little college football talk. And, big weekend of some more upsets in college football. Crazy situation down in the Texas-Georgia game. But kind of along those lines, the question that, I have is really, is the SEC too tough for Texas and OU?
Yeah, I think for OU, possibly, at least in the near future. I wouldn't say I think it is for Texas. I think Texas can hold its own in the division or the conference, I should say. But yeah, I mean, looking at it, I think OU, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've typically been a pretty good offensive team. And I think, coming into the SEC, what they're not understanding is the defense is so much better in the conference. So you might have had a pretty potent offense, but you're going up against a much better defense. More physical, more talented. I mean, you name it. There's some of the best defensive players come out of the SEC and get into the NFL.
Yeah, even the officiating in the SEC is a little bit different than some of the other conferences because, if you don't know this, listeners out there, each conference has their own conference officials. And in the SEC, they basically have kind of made it known that they want to allow a little bit more physical play, especially on the outside. So, you got these receivers and you got a passing attack and you're going up against an SEC defense with SEC officiating and they're jamming them at the line of scrimmage and they're really, pushing on them and kind of tugging on them a little bit. They're going to let them get away with a lot more. And I don't know that OU is ready for that. I'm sure that they got prepped on this stuff and everybody was aware of what they were getting into and that the SEC is the big leagues. Not that OU wasn't, a big league team before, but it's different when you go up against this competition week in and week out. When you don't have a Kansas, football team on your schedule, you don't have, a weak Texas Tech or TCU or, even like West Virginia. Like I know, Pat McAfee's, awesome and everything, and he went to West Virginia and he loves them, but like those are not tough games. If those are your tougher games on your schedule, you've got a pretty easy schedule. Meanwhile, if you look at OU's schedule this year in the SEC, it is brutal. Their easiest game was against Auburn, and they barely won that game. They probably they're not going to be favored probably in any of their remaining SEC games. So there's a chance that they're going to be
in comparison, compared to Texas, just looking at that, I again think Texas has looked better, but looking at their schedules too, Texas has a much easier schedule than OU has. So I do expect it to look like OU is going to be overmatched compared to Texas overall. But, when you talk about, again, what you would think would be their strength, they put up 9 points against South Carolina, 3 points against Texas. I get Texas wasn't there, but I again think they can hang in the SEC. 3 points there. You mentioned beating Auburn, put up 27, which is not bad, but again, Auburn's a
It
weaker
included a
opponent
defensive touchdown.
in a defensive touchdown, and then they only put up 15 against Tennessee. So when you look at that, what I would think to be kind of their strength coming in, you can talk about the officiating, you can talk about it being a little bit more physical, but actually going out and doing it is a whole different ball game. So I think, OU just one really, really tough schedule, regardless of, like Texas or any of the other teams that are in the end. They got a really tough schedule. I think their offense just hasn't appeared to adjust yet. So we'll see what happens. Again, I think in the short term, they do appear to be a little overmatched in the SEC. Again, Texas, I think, is a team that can battle. I mean, losing to Georgia by, a couple scores, I think Georgia is still one of the top teams. I get Alabama took them out, and Alabama lost a couple questionable games. But it's easy to always look at who beat who and see where that puts you. I think Georgia is a pretty top-notch team. I think losing to them by a couple scores, not the end of the world. I think we've seen, what Texas can do. I think they'll be okay, again, especially this year with a little bit softer schedule compared to, OU and maybe some of the other teams. But yeah, right now, OU is looking like it's going to be a bit more of an adjustment period than Texas at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think Texas is going to be fine this year. I do worry about them when they get to the college football playoff this year because their schedule has been pretty weak. And especially with Michigan's most recent loss, Michigan now has 3 losses, including a loss to Illinois and a loss to Washington, which is not a very good football team this year. I don't know that Texas has an impressive win on their schedule yet. I mean, they beat OU 34-3, but OU might not win. OU might win 5 games total and only 1 in the SEC. Like, that's a realistic outcome, is that they finish with only 1 conference win this year. So that is not a good win. So we'll have to see. I think that's what's making college football really, really exciting right now is conference realignment. So you're getting OU and Texas against the big dogs in the SEC, but then the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams. We're going to see like what teams are truly made of more frequently now. So all these years in the past where people have complained that their team didn't get in, Florida State last year, although they got much bigger problems now. Much. They just lost to Duke at football, which I didn't even know Duke fielded a Division I football team, but I
Duke's
digress.
team has done a lot better. Duke's football team has been a lot better over the past
couple. They actually have had a really good season this year.
Yeah.
It is very impressive. But anyway, we look at like what's happening with the 12-team playoff. And, if you're Texas and you don't win your conference, which is definitely a possibility now that they lost to Georgia, if they don't win their conference, that means they're playing in the first round. Now, they might get to host the game, but they could be playing a much tougher team than they are that's had a tougher road and maybe is 9-3 or 10-2, that they think, oh, well, we got a better record than them. We're a better team, and they might get surprised. So I think there's a lot of room for some crazy outcomes happening, especially in that first round of the college football playoff. I think you're going to see at least one pretty significant upset.
I think it'll be great. I think it'll be one of those years. It'll be hard to hear a lot of complaints. And I mean, people are always going to complain no matter how you slice it. But compared to years past,
team number 13 is going to be pissed.
Exactly. And there's going to be some of that. And inevitably, whether it's this year or one of the coming years, there's going to be that team who is number 12 and does upset somebody in that first game. It's probably going to happen. And then they're going to say, well, 13, we could have done that. So there'll always be something. But to your point, I think there will be some teams. You'll have teams like Georgia from last year. That's not going to be as high seed because they've lost a couple games or whatever it might be. They don't win their conference tournament. But you're going to sit there and be like, okay, I don't care if they're the 8 or the 9 seed. Like, this is one of the best teams. This is why you shouldn't have complained in years past when they got in. Because even though they had a loss or two, like, they're going to do that. You're also going to see some teams that run the table. Whether it's Boise State, whoever it ends up being that gets in there, they're 12-0, and you're saying, see, we should be in there, and then they're going to come out and get smoked by, someone from the SEC or the Big Ten. You're going to say, see, that's why we've kept teams out like that in the past, is because even though you ran the table, your strength of schedule was nothing. So I think you're just going to see some of those really, in kind of from every perspective of teams getting in there and how things shape up. There'll always be the one-off, outcomes that happen. But I think you're going to see a lot of that stuff where it'll just keep people a little quieter. You can be like, okay, that makes sense why that's happened that way in the past, right? But it should make for a fun playoff. I think it's a good, the right amount of games to be played, the right amount of teams to get in. I think going much bigger would be a little crazy. So yeah, I'm excited to see what it actually looks like as it happens for the first time, and see how teams handle it.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. But we're gonna switch gears again. We're gonna go to the NFL, so the big dogs. And first thing let's talk about is the last remaining undefeated team in the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs. They beat the San Francisco 49ers, who are now 0-5 against Patrick Mahomes under the Kyle Shanahan era. And it's hard to make out what is really going on with those two teams following this game and what's happened this season. I would say both teams have looked not very good to start the year, realistically, especially compared to both teams' standards. Yet one team is 6-0, and the other team is now 3-4, I believe the 49ers are.
That's right.
And so, they're both in this spot where they probably don't feel like they've played as well as they could. But one team is two-time defending Super Bowl champion who has the 49ers number, and it's not even like an argument anymore. And the other team is got just nothing but questions on their field right now. So, should the Chiefs still be the betting favorite to win the Super Bowl? Or, are they actually maybe closer to a mid-range team potentially?
Yeah, I think why they would probably feel different and why the records are different, is a few main things. The 49ers, I mean, people talk about all the time is how many weapons they have, how talented they are in so many spots, right? The quarterback position is the, least kind of highly talked about position. Even that, there's been a lot of positive talk about Purdy and where he's been. I think the difference for them is they've always been this team with so much firepower on the defense and offensive side. They've gotten to the big game consistently. They've made it through the playoffs consistently, but they've been full doing that, and they've still come up short every year. So for them to now be going through all the injuries that they're going through, right? McCaffrey, who has been an MVP candidate multiple times, has been out basically all season. Debo has been kind of in and out with some little things and an illness this game, different stuff that he's been out for. Ayuk now obviously out for the season, but he was holding out early, kind of a slow start for him. Just a lot of things in that regard that, aren't positive. So when you see him starting 3-4, there's not a whole lot of positive to take away from that. Even the Bengals, who I can say I think I'm done on them and I don't think they have a chance, we've at least seen them get off to slow starts. We've seen them have bad defenses. Everything you're seeing now, we've seen in the past, and we've seen them overcome that. That's, I think, the difference with the Chiefs. MO. It's their MO. And the Chiefs, I wouldn't say it's their MO to look really shitty in every game and then do well. But recently, we've seen that. So, I mean, before last year, even I think most of us would agree Patrick Mahomes is the number one quarterback in the league. Andy Reid maybe is number one, number two as a coach when Belichick was still coaching. He was right up there as a top two, top three coach. So you're sitting there, and now recently, last year, we just saw this exact same thing. And we saw them win. Exact same thing. Maybe, you could pinpoint some differences. But in essence, they started last year, they were 9-6. 9-6, the offense looked terrible. Everyone was questioning, there's no receivers. Now, the receivers hadn't gotten injured. They just didn't really have any. But it looked very much like it looks this year. So they got off to a slow start. The offense looked bad. Their defense was great. Defense is great again. It's top 5 defense. Some would say maybe the number 1 defense in the league. So you still got that.
Better defense this year.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a better defense than last year. I think Pat Mahomes is still the number 1 quarterback. Andy Reid's the number 1 coach in the league. So we just saw this stuff last year. Most people were doubting him. Most people were questioning, what are we seeing? What's going on? And then they win the Super Bowl. So I think that the difference is you're seeing it and saying, man, it has not looked pretty, and they're still somehow figuring out a way to win. And we just saw this type of play last year, and they still won it. So at the end of the day, you can watch the Ravens and say they look incredible all of a sudden. You can watch the Lions and then think they're great, but they've never gotten to the mountaintop. The Chiefs have done it, and they've done it in kind of a similar fashion that we're seeing this year. I just don't see how you really pull them off until they lose, right? If they lose, and I mean the Super Bowl, that is. You lose this year, you don't win the Super Bowl. Now, next year, you can have more questions about this kind of play. But until then, I don't really care how ugly they look. I think you have to kind of assume they're going to be right back at it.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel very similarly. The only thing that concerns me a little bit about the Chiefs is that they've only beaten 2 teams with a winning record right now. They beat Baltimore, and I'm drawing a blank on the other team that they beat with a winning record. Let me pull that up. But while I'm pulling that up, amongst the remaining games on their schedule, they only have 4 games that they play against teams with a winning record. It was the Falcons. So they beat the Falcons and the Ravens. Now the Ravens look really, really good. So there's a chance that turns out to be an indicator that, okay, this Chiefs team still has got it. But Derrick Henry didn't play very well in that game. I think a lot of that had to do with how they were using him. Felt like they weren't fully committed to using him in a spectacular role like they have the rest of the season. So, who knows? And, if Isaiah Likely's foot is 3 centimeters shorter, they win that game. So that concerns me a little bit, is like, I don't see any like marquee wins on their schedule. At the beginning of the season, you'd be like, oh, a win over San Francisco, that was pretty much not in doubt. That's a marquee win, but now they don't look as good. So I want to see, or I shouldn't say I got to see, right? To your point, they're the 2-time defending champion. We saw them play terrible last year and still managed to win a Super Bowl. So clearly they can figure out ways to win. I want to see a little bit more of that, high-powered offense again. And we might not get that this year, with Rice out for an extended period of time, no Hollywood Brown, maybe at any point for them. And Travis Kelce aging, like, we might not get to see that again, which is sad. But, I think they're going to be in a position in the playoffs to have home field advantage again, just simply because I don't think their schedule is that tough. Let's say they lose to the 4 remaining teams that have winning seasons so far. That still puts them at, 13-4? They're probably going to be the number 1 seed in the AFC with 13-4. And that's if they don't beat any winning teams. So then in the playoffs, they get to host it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that not any like significant wins, because they actually had, at least going into the season, and I'm not saying it can't change with whether injuries or just the team not being what we thought it was going to be, but they actually had the strongest strength of schedule, I think, out of anyone. It was like one of the top strength of schedules coming into the league, at least that first part of it. So, I get your point. Nobody's really looked that good. They did beat the Chargers, who are 3-3. I mean, they've had their kind of ups and downs, if you will, but I think they're a decent team. Again, I'm the first person out on the Bengals, but people love the Bengals. It's the greatest 3-4 team of all time. So that they did get a win there. So they've had a few. I think they're just at that stage too. Obviously the comparisons to Tom Brady are always there, and it's like, just get the wins. Get them any way you can. They don't have to be pretty. You could put up 100 yards. You could put up 5 touchdowns. You could put up 1 touchdown. It doesn't really matter. We're getting the wins. And they seem to do, again, the Travis Kelce thing, it doesn't appear to be all that shocking, right? Like, it's surprising because they're used to seeing him be so good. But the fact we all realize his age and where he's at in his career, it's not shocking that they're not even they're not putting him in trouble. They're not. Look at the injuries that are just going around the league. People are getting hit like crazy on these random plays that you just wouldn't even think are big. I think you keep them out of trouble as much as you can. You test out different play. You're doing different things. And if you can get the wins all along the way, you hope you don't throw away a couple stupid ones at the end of games, but you're still getting the wins. I think they just realize, like, we don't have to go out and put this thing in there. And if and when we have to come out and do it, we can do it. I mean, their first game of the year was against the Ravens. That's probably the best game they looked. And it was against the best opponent they played. I mean, Derrick Henry, they were still working him in, but I think they have it there to do it. Again, it's one of those things, you're not saying Mahomes just throwing interceptions because he doesn't care. Of course, that's not happening. But just like when the pressure really gets there, when they know they're on the line, have to do it, they do seem to figure out a way to make that happen. And I just, again, with some of those things that we already touched on, I just feel like it's something that I wouldn't want to bet against until it's totally proven, like, nope, they're not what they were. They can't do it,
Yeah, I mean, it would take a lot for me to bet that they won't make it to the Super Bowl or definitely the AFC Championship game, because that's literally all Pat Mahomes has ever done is make it to an AFC Championship game. So, I fully expect them to do that. And there's maybe something to be said about, not necessarily holding back during the season because, again, games in the NFL, they matter. You got to win football games, but they clearly have figured out a way to grind out games in different ways and play, that kind of like slow, methodical game where it's a little sloppy on both sides, but they still manage to come out, victorious. So I do think maybe there is a little bit of that holding back of we know we can run plays. We can beat any team out there. We're not going to run our best plays. We're not going to have our best game plan against every single team coming out because we don't want the rest of the league to just be like, well, that's what they're doing,
Yeah.
So I think they're.
I mean, we saw with like Detroit.
Interception point.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say to the interception point, right? He's got 8 interceptions to 6 touchdowns this year. But, he's got an interception that was a deflection that lands in the arms of a defensive lineman for his first ever career pick. A receiver falls down mid-route, slips, and Mahomes throws the ball where he was supposed to be, pick. Last week, Juju Smith-Schuster gets hit in the hands in the end zone, and that ends up being a pick. He also, I think Kadarius Toney last year had 2 separate bounce off the hands interceptions.
At least 2. He might have had 3.
It's very odd. I don't have the stats to back this up because I haven't looked through the film of every interception he's thrown. But Mahomes has to be leading the league in the last 2 years of weird interceptions that should not be on the quarterback because they hit somebody else in the hands. Or they were just this random fluke thing, like a receiver falling down mid-route when the ball's thrown to him. There is nothing Mahomes can do if his receiver slips and falls. And there's nothing he can do if it hits the receiver in the hands. He's done his part. So I do think Mahomes' numbers look worse than his play has looked. But there's some concern that they need to be able to beat really good teams, and they might not get a lot of opportunities to showcase that in the regular season.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I'll finish on this point, but I think with that, I've never seen anything. I've never heard him talk about it, but just, being an athlete, playing sports and kind of thinking through things, he seems like to me, and the team seems like with Andy Reid and just the success that they've had, we're going to learn, we've talked about it in our profession, even instead of bringing someone in to do joint meetings, having a mentor be there and do the meeting, and all you do is watch. You want to be in there and do it. And maybe you're going to fail, but you're going to fail quickly and you're going to learn from it. And you're going to say, okay, we're not going to do that again. Whether it's Mahomes or the receivers, nobody is doing more with less when it comes to talent from the receivers than Mahomes has been able to do. And it's looked ugly at a lot of times. But look how they finished the end of last year. Look at those guys who are making enormous plays from where's Kadarius Toney, whether it's MV, guys that are getting dropped by other teams, and they can pick them up for pennies on the dollar again because these teams don't want them. I think what he does, this again, just my opinion on it, is he's throwing those balls and saying, I'm going to throw it when I expect you to be ready for it. So the guy might not have his head turned, but he knows that's when I throw it. The guy turns and it's whoops, off my chest because I'm not ready because I'm not used to you throwing it at that speed and that timing. But Mahomes I don't care. I'm going to do it so you get used to how that is supposed to look in crucial moments because we can't – I'm not going to sit there and hold it let the guy cover on you and throw it because now you're ready for it. That's not how this is going to work. I think he's willing to play as if he's throwing it to Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, the best receivers he's ever had. And he's saying, hey, there's going to be some drop passes. There's going to be all these things because we're not on the same page yet. You guys are not ready for what this is going to be. But I'd rather throw 8 picks right now so that when we get to the playoffs, you guys now know your head's not going to be turning. The ball's going to be there. As soon as it turns, hands got to be ready and you got to catch that. So again, it's kind of just a personal feel, but I think based on his talent and how they end up picking things up by the end of the year, I think that's what he's doing, Sam. I don't really care about some of these mistakes. But let's figure out how we need to really execute that timing for the long run, and that's what we're going to do. And stuff's going to happen. And as far as just kind of taking some time off and doing things, I could sit there and crush LeBron and these guys for doing it when they end up being the 8th seed and they're in the play-in tournament. But if they're able to do it and be undefeated, be the only undefeated team in the league, like, what can you really say about it? It's like, I don't care if you guys come out and sleepwalk every game and look like you don't care. If you're undefeated, that's all you got to do. I mean, kudos to you to be able to come out that way, be undefeated, still be number 1 seed. So I think there's a little bit of that element too. Like, let's not show everything we have. Let's keep our guys healthy. Let's work on some timing stuff. If we're still able to stack up these wins, no problem on our end.
Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say I think we're both still pretty high on the Chiefs, but they're going to have to prove it. This is potentially going to be the greatest dynasty in all of football if they win the Super Bowl this year. It'll certainly be up for debate because it's never been done before. So to do something that's never been done before, they might have to think outside the box, and maybe that's what they're doing. And they're just showing teams that they're going to grind out wins, and it's going to be messy and ugly. And then come the playoffs, like you said, their guys are ready. The young guys are ready because they've been thrown into the fire every game all season long. It's going to make for awesome theater at the end of the year.
They can get to the Super Bowl and have a chance at a three-peat. Maybe it'll be a rematch from 2 years ago. The Philadelphia Eagles have been flying high in moments and in little past time, and more recently not looking so good. I think a lot of people have had their reasons for maybe why they're struggling, where their problems lie. Is it the coaching? Is it the quarterback? Is it, a lot of different things. Sometimes they look really good, though. Like I said, Jalen has his moments. He looks good. AJ's back, looks good. Saquon's a good addition. But I guess what's your thought on Philly overall? Are they too star dependent? Or are they going to be able to make a run and, again, possibly get back to a Super Bowl a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that Philly team we saw lose that incredible Super Bowl 2 years ago is a totally different team now. And, I know they don't have Jason Kelsey anymore, but, I mean, he's a center. Like, I get that's an important position on the offensive line, but you cannot tell me that that's why their offense has looked kind of like start and stop all season. I really think a lot of their issues as a team comes down to their coach-quarterback relationship. There was the report right before the season started that Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts did not get along at all, that Jalen basically doesn't respect him, which, let's be real, Jalen Hurts is clearly like a leader type person. Like, when you hear him talk and you just see his body of work, like, that's a dude who leads by example and like puts in the work and doesn't run his mouth. And Nick Sirianni is not any of that. Like, I'm not saying the guy hasn't worked hard to get to where he is. Of course he has. To become an NFL head coach, you have to be a hard worker. Like, you don't lazy your way into that job. That being said, I have to assume that Jalen Hurts basically hates everything about his personality. Chirping with fans, talking brash, trash talking other players. Like, Jalen Hurts has got to be sitting there thinking, like, this is not how you win football games, man. He played for Nick Saban. He played for Lincoln Riley. Those guys know how to like coach players, know how to instill like the good leadership values. So I think there's a serious problem with Jalen and Nick Sirianni. One, I don't think their offensive game plan has been great, and it has been too reliant on their stars. Like, You got to get A.J. Brown the ball or the offense doesn't go anywhere. If Saquon's not rushing the ball a lot, offense isn't moving the ball enough. So I do think you need a better game plan, but I also think it helps if your coach and your quarterback like each other. I just think that's kind of a necessity in modern football. And I mean, you saw it at the end of the Brady Belichick dynasty. I think Brady got to the point where he was kind of fed up with Belichick's attitude and just refusal to stop. He was getting grumpier and grumpier as they were winning, and Tom was getting looser and looser. And so eventually that was bound to, butt heads. And so Tom leaves. I think that I think that's happening in Philly, except for Philly's not going to let Jalen leave. They're going to kick Nick Sirianni to the curb because this team's got too much talent. I just believe they've got too much talent to be this up and down. And I don't trust them to get to the Super Bowl being this way.
Yeah, no, I don't know the exact answer to it, but I just feel like something is off. Either the reporting is off, the way people are taking things is off. Something to me just isn't adding up. To your point of being up and down, I look at up and down as kind of like the Josh Allen roller coaster, like game to game. The guy, it looks like the best quarterback in the league or the worst. They haven't really been that up and down. They were really up, went to the Super Bowl, probably should have won it, and maybe they're like, the 49ers and missed their window, but really good. Then they were just pretty much shit. And now they're appearing to get back up. Now, again, it's early in this upswing, but it hasn't been like game to game as much as it's been kind of these big, long swoops. So obviously something had to have happened at the end of last year. You can't start off the season as well as they did and then just see that collapse, including their final playoff game. I mean, I don't know how to explain that without talking about Sirianni and some of the issues that are there. I just look at that relationship and I say, I don't think Jalen Hurts would have that strong of an opinion on anybody. And I don't know the guy, but I mean, just looking at him, seeing the way he conducts himself, I just would find it hard to believe that he would have that strong of an opinion negatively about anyone he comes across. I also look at it as like any relationship that we're in. There obviously has to be some level of compatibility, something you like about each other and enjoy about each other. That's why you're in a relationship. But the saying of opposites attract, there's a reason for that. If you're working with someone who is exactly like you and everything's the same, that can get really boring. It can also get really dangerous. If two people have bad habits and you both do them and you commit to them and no one calls each other out, isn't good. I think there's actually a healthy relationship personally, just, viewing it where he might be a little bit of this and he's a little bit of that, but they can kind of offset each other. I have to believe, as you mentioned, we've talked about with a lot of other coaches, the quarterback's typically going to stay, assuming you think it's the guy. And even if you don't, if you paid him, he's probably going to stay, whether it's Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson. I mean, you name it, the quarterback's typically going to stay. So I'm just looking at it and saying, well, you paid this guy a lot of money. He's looked really good in moments. And again, it's been a little while since we've seen that really, really good that he had. But he has looked really good. If he wants him gone, I don't really see this lasting that long. You mentioned Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, the greatest dynasty we've ever seen to this point. We'll see what the Chiefs can accomplish in the years to come. That ended pretty quickly, in my personal opinion. That ended pretty quickly to be that significant of a pairing, that much success. It would be pretty easy to be like, hey, I get you guys are button heads right now, but we got all these trophies to show for it. Figure this shit out. We're not ending this. But they ended it, again, in my opinion, pretty quickly. Sirianni has been on the hot seat in, people's eyes, fans' eyes, the media's eyes for a long time. I just don't really see that being this big of an issue that we're all making it out to be if one or the other isn't feeling it. And again, I think it'd be Sirianni goes and Jalen gets to stay. But if Sirianni's like, I can't work with Jalen, this guy we're too different, they'd be like, all right, then you have to leave because we're keeping him. So see you later. I just don't see them continuing to get through this stuff and get there. So again, something had to have occurred right at the end of last year. That just isn't some weird funk and no one has an answer. Something had to have been going on internally we didn't see. But I just think the team is too good. I think the beginning of this year new coordinators. They're trying to figure out what that offense is going to truly look like. I think Jalen, I mean, the last 2 games, he hasn't had a turnover. The defense is looking a lot better. They haven't given up an offensive touchdown the last 2 games. Competition hasn't been the highest in the league, I understand, but still the Giants have given people some challenges, here and there. The Browns, not so much, but no touchdowns on defense. That Georgia defensive line, baby, they recruited in the right spot from the SEC, and those guys are starting to look pretty good. Jalen Carter's looking really good. I think they're going to start hitting this stride. We talked about them going up against the Bengals. This will be a good test. I mean, again, I'm personally not high on the Bengals, but a lot of people are. I think people will give the Eagles some respect if they can come out and win this game and look pretty convincing doing it. I think they can make a run. Now, I could look like a fool, but I just personally feel like they're going to figure things out. And again, too much talent to not make a considerable run.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'd say on it is just, I mean, I agree with you on the Bengals game, because if the Eagles come out and they beat the Bengals, and even if it's a close game, as long as they look good and they beat the Bengals, like if the Bengals come out and Joe Burrow throws 4 interceptions and their offense just does nothing and it's clearly just like a mess, and they win 20-3, I'm going to be like, all right, I don't know about this yet. But if they go out there and they play a good game and the Bengals play a good game and Philly wins, I do think that there's going to be some more talk of okay, maybe Philly's back. Maybe whatever funk they were in is done. Maybe they lit some sage and they just, walked around the field with it and just kind of got the bad jujus away. Yeah. I mean, you got to try everything when you're in a funk. You got to get your mojo back.
Yeah. No question.
Yeah, so I think it's a big game for them this week, and I'd like to see. I'd just like to see a great game between those two teams, because I think there's way too much talent on those two teams to not have them both be better than what they have looked recently.
Well, like you said, we pull up these schedules half the time. It's like you're looking to find these great games to watch, but every game's kind of like, well, is that team any good? Like, I want to be able to say there's some great team. There's a lot of really good teams. So it'd be great to be able to put the Eagles and the Bengals. Like I said, I'm not trying to give up on them for any other reason than I just think they have an uphill battle. But it'd be great to be able to look at those games like that is going to be a good game because both these teams are very good. I'd love to be able to say that. So, yeah, hopefully it's a good game. Big game for both of them. So I'd expect that you're going to see the best effort out of both of them, and we'll see what they can do. But I'm feeling it. I'm feeling them.
All righty. Well, we're going to wrap up part 1 here with that being said. And when we come back, we're going to have a quick fantasy football update and then some more NFL talk. And then we're going to talk about games to watch. And of course, we will finish it up with our locks of the week. And this week, I feel like we've got some real winners. So you will not want to miss that. So stay tuned for part 2. We'll be right back.